This is King World News. I'm Eric King, and you're about to hear a wake-up call for many, an extremely important and powerful interview with the #1 trends forecaster in the world, Gerald Celente. Gerald just put out a brand new release, and we cover that in this interview. Remember to go to our homepage at www.kingworldnews.com for more interviews, where this week we will release no later than Monday the interview with the legendary Jim Sinclair from jsmindset.com. We also have Bill Fleckenstein from Fleckenstein Capital, and where last Tuesday we released an incredible interview with Harry Markopolos, a national hero, the man who brought down Bernie Madoff. Joining us now is Gerald Celente, founder and director of the Trends Research Institute, author of Trends 2000 and Trend Tracking, and publisher of the Trends Journal. He has been forecasting trends since 1980 and recently called the collapse of 2009. Gerald, I wanted to do a show within a show today talking about preparation and ways for people to be prepared going forward, because you just had an incident. You were there for the earthquake down in Chile. We'll get into that, and then also we'll talk about the Federal Reserve, and we'll get into a bunch of different topics. But can you start off talking about the release that you guys are kicking out today? Because this is amazing to me that you actually were there when this earthquake happened in Chile. Can you talk about that?
Yes. One of the top trends in our Trends Journal, we listed neo-survivalism, the importance of people to think in survival mode during these critical times. And with the Trends Journal, what we did, we provided an outline, a guide for people to consider on how to survive, whether it's an economic crisis, a physical crisis, a psychological crisis, or a crisis wrought by Mother Nature, crime, war, whatever it might be, steps to take, measures to consider. Well, on a fact-finding trip that took us to Argentina, Uruguay, and Santiago, we put those survival strategies into place. We arrived in Santiago on Thursday, February 25th, and on the 27th, the earthquake struck. And there were a number of things that were very important to understand as this started to happen. Number one, just by a fluke, every time I go into a new city, I always go on one of these city tours. And I wanted just to get a layout of the place so I know where I am, get a little bit familiar with it, and then I could move from there. Even if I have a host in the city, I always do that. And the guide mentioned that they were building the tallest building in Santiago in Latin America, even though it was an earthquake zone, but they hadn't had an earthquake in 20 years, and she just kind of sloughed off that, well, I guess we're due for one because they happen about every 20 years. Well, less than 24 hours later, we were woken up. We were on the 14th floor of the Crown Plaza Hotel, a five-star hotel. Windows were closed. But in Santiago, the streets are loaded during the day with sleeping dogs all over the sidewalks. It's the most hysterical-looking thing you could imagine. They're just stretched out over there. But about 3 a.m., we were woken up, even at 14 floors with the windows closed, to howling dogs. In retrospect, it was a wake-up call, a harbinger of what to expect, because shortly after there was a tremor. I'm a close combat practitioner. At the first sign of the tremor, my colleague said to me, "Do you feel that?" I said, "Yeah, I'm out of here." And I just put on my pants, put on my shoes, and as I went for my jacket, all hell broke loose. The TV went flying from the stand. The bureau drawers started shooting out. The lamps toppled over, furniture. There was a moment when I thought I would die. I could die. It registered very clearly. But I never broke stride. And I was the first one to make it down 14 flights of stairs. The only other sound besides my buddy that was picking up my heels was the sound of somebody praying in Spanish that was a few flights above us coming down the stairs. By the time we got outside, then I'm being very brief in this, because the exit was blocked on the third floor, and then we had to find another way around. When we got out to the streets, remember this is 3:30 a.m. on Saturday night in Santiago. In the Latin countries, the people are out late at night and they're partying. all of a sudden, screaming gangs of young men, maybe 30, 40 strong, came swarming down the street, bowling over everything in their way and mugging whoever was around them. So the crisis just kept going, and we had to keep our survival strategies in place. What really got us out of there, and the airports were closed, damage was severe. Thankfully, the building didn't topple, but it's destroyed. There's not a level floor on the place anymore. They were built earthquake resistant, so it withstood the shock, but, the damage is extensive. The next thing that we did, and we recommend this in the Trends Journal, when you're planning for survival, do it with a group. Whether it's a book club, like-minded people, a community-minded spirit. Think of things to do. What if there's a terror attack? There may be food shortages. There may be earthquakes. There may be floods, hurricanes, you name it. Anything could happen. But the odds are that something is going to happen because we're in a very volatile time now and systems are breaking down. So the next thing we did was we sent out an alert to our martial arts group, attackproof.com, to our mentor and the master, John Perkins. He sent out a global SOS. Within hours, suggestions started coming in. We had contacts, high-level contacts at the embassy. It went on and on and on. We had contacts in Chile. We had contacts in Argentina. And one of the suggestions that came through was to get a driver, get out of Chile, and go to Mendoza, Argentina. And then a whole other series of events. Cars were going for $2,000 a ride. When I go into a place, I befriend whoever I'm there with, and I befriended a bellhop. And I'm a generous tipper, too. So don't be cheap. That's the other part of the lesson. Because I asked this guy, I said, hey, listen, you have a friend that wants to make a couple of bucks. So to make a very long story short, because there were many other complications, we arrived at Mendoza actually in time to fly back to Buenos Aires and make my scheduled connecting flight back to New York. So those are the messages. The messages are the motto of the Trends Research Institute. Think for yourself. When we interviewed people later on the next day, you know what people did? They stayed in their rooms. They called up the front desk to ask what to do. Other people went into their bathtubs or stood on the doorways. Others waited for their tour guide operators. There are no leaders in these kind of times. You have to lead yourself. And those are the kind of times we're going into now. You have to think for yourself and you have to lead yourself. The second thing, very, very important, and that is belong to a network, like-minded people. Stay in touch. You never know what you're going to need and who can help, how it could help. And the other thing is always, always prepare for the worst. If the worst doesn't happen, great. You were prepared for it. Nothing was lost. But if the worst happens and you have no preparations, everything's lost. And in these times that are coming, if people think there's going to be an economic savior, a geopolitical messiah, somebody that's going to win wars and lead them to salvation, they better think twice.
Gerald, let me get into this just a bit further with you because you and I have been through natural disasters. I went through both quakes in California. It was, I think, 6 miles away from our home in Santa Cruz was the epicenter of the earthquake. They called it the San Francisco earthquake. It sounded more glamorous. But Santa Cruz was so devastated that President Bush did a secret visit there. Many people were dead. The downtown was collapsed. Los Angeles was also a disaster when I was there. I was there also for the riots. And people don't understand, Gerald, and you do, that it's total chaos, that everything breaks down. They don't understand the danger. They don't understand the violence. And you and I are trying to warn the listeners and the people of the United States that a social breakdown is going to happen in the future, and they have to prepare themselves now.
That's right. Look, you know one of my sayings, Eric, as a Bronx guy, when people lose everything and they have nothing left to lose, they lose it. And you saw them losing it in Chile. You saw this guy who crashed his plane into the IRS building. He had nothing left to lose. You have people and countries that the United States is involved in wars who've lost their families, they've lost their future. They have nothing left to lose. It's as old as the Old Testament, an eye for an eye. We are entering a period of high-level terrorist